The Hazard Communication Standard was created by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, in 1983. Also known as the HAZCOM standard, this regulation gives you the right to know about any hazardous substances in your workplace and how to handle them safely. One important source of this information is hazmat container labels. To ensure that the labels on hazmat containers communicate clearly, OSHA requires them to follow the rules that are set out in the Globally Harmonized System, or GHS. In this program, we will discuss the goals of the HAZCOM standard, the advantages of the Globally Harmonized System, and how the information on hazmat container labels can help you to work safely with hazardous materials. In general, hazard communication helps people work more safely by informing them about any potential hazards they could encounter on the job. OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard focuses on the hazards that are associated with hazardous materials, hazmats. This HAZCOM standard ensures that workers know about any hazmats on their job sites and are provided with the information they need to work with those materials safely. This information must be provided by the companies that supply the hazardous materials, as well as companies with employees who handle them. Under HAZCOM, information is communicated in three main ways: by hazmat container labels, by the safety data sheets that are provided for each substance, and by the written hazard communication program that each employer creates for their company. Because the original HAZCOM standard was performance-based, it described what hazmat suppliers and employers needed to do and let them decide how to do it. For example, OSHA told hazmat suppliers what information should appear on container labels and let the individual companies come up with their own systems for presenting that information. As a result, a number of different labeling systems were developed for use on hazmat containers. This meant that an employee might have to remember how several labeling systems worked and could have trouble getting important information from a label that used an unfamiliar system, especially in an emergency. And that could be dangerous. People who handle hazardous materials need to be able to get information about hazmats quickly and clearly in order to work with them safely, no matter where those people are or what language they speak. To make vital information available quickly and easily, OSHA needed a standard system for presenting that information on the container labels and other documentation that is required under the HAZCOM standard. They found it in the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals created by the United Nations. The Globally Harmonized System, or GHS, helps people anywhere in the world get accurate information about hazardous materials and was integrated into the HAZCOM standard in 2012. To do this, the system standardizes how materials are classified, how their hazards and safety precautions are described, and how this information is presented, so that all workers can find the information they need even under pressure. GHS begins this process of standardizing hazmat information by dividing materials into hazard classes that are represented by 9 pictograms. These images help a container label communicate hazard information at a glance. GHS container labels also use text elements to convey 5 specific types of information about a material, including its name, signal word, hazard statement, precautionary information, and the name and contact information of its supplier. The Globally Harmonized System also recommends how these elements should be positioned on the label, so an employee always knows just where to look to find the information they want. Under the Hazard Communication Standard, GHS compliant labels must be displayed on all hazmat containers, except those that are used as in-house containers, secondary containers that will never leave the job site. While in-house labels do not have to follow the GHS format, they do have to display all of the information that is required by the system. When it created the globally harmonized system, the United Nations faced a serious challenge: how to explain the types of hazards that are associated with different materials to people from diverse cultural backgrounds who also speak different languages. The UN solution was simple. They used pictures. These images are called pictograms. They represent the hazards that are associated with a material inside a container. There are 9 pictograms in the globally harmonized system. They describe important information about a material's physical properties, its health effects, and how it can affect the environment. These pictograms are the main visual elements on a GHS container label and help communicate a material's hazards at a glance. An image of a person's upper body with a star inside it is the health hazard pictogram. It indicates that a chemical's hazards may include the potential to cause cancer, reproductive, target organ or aspiration toxicity, or respiratory sensitivity. The flame pictogram indicates that the chemical is flammable or pyrophoric, self-heating or self-reactive, a type of organic peroxide, or that it emits a flammable gas. An exclamation point indicates that the chemical may be harmful to humans, a sensitizer or irritant to the skin, eyes, or respiratory tract, has narcotic effects, or is hazardous to the ozone layer. An image of a gas cylinder indicates that the chemical is a gas under pressure. Test tubes dripping a liquid on a bar of metal and a hand means that the chemical can be corrosive to metals and cause injuries to the skin and eyes. An image of an explosion shows that the substance is explosive, self-reactive, or another type of organic peroxide. A picture of a flame over a circle indicates that the chemical is an oxidizer, which can cause other materials to burn more intensely. The image of a dead tree and fish means that the chemical is hazardous to the environment and can harm living things in the water. And the skull and crossbones pictogram tells us that the chemical is acutely toxic and that exposure can cause illness and even death. Many dense pages of technical text could be written about any single hazardous material. But all of that data isn't very useful to someone who works with a hazmat and needs information about it quickly. That's why the globally harmonized system standardizes the classification and description of hazardous materials and summarizes this information so that it can be communicated accurately and efficiently even in an emergency situation. GHS container labels use 5 text elements to describe a material's physical properties and hazards, as well as the precautions that should be taken when handling it. While GHS does not require text elements on container labels to appear in a specific format, the system does recommend a certain order and position for them. At the top of the label is the material's name, as it appears on its safety data sheet. GHS calls this information the product chemical identifier. The next element is the chemical's signal word. This indicates the relative severity of the chemical's hazards. The 2 standard signal words used by the GHS system are warning, hazardous, and danger, very hazardous. Another text element on a GHS label is the hazard statement. Based on a material's hazard class and category, these phrases describe the nature and severity of its hazards. While there are many different hazard statements in the globally harmonized system, they have been standardized as much as possible. Commonly used GHS hazard statements include phrases such as "may be harmful if swallowed," "causes severe skin burns and eye damage," and "suspected of causing cancer." Appearing next on the label is the chemical's precautionary statement. This is usually the largest block of text on the label. GHS precautionary statements follow a standard form as well. They provide 4 types of information about a hazmat, including how to prevent exposure, how to respond in case of a spill, how to store the material safely, and how to dispose of it properly. Finally, the label includes the name, address, and telephone number of the company that produced or distributed the chemical, known as the supplier identifier. The most hazardous types of materials are the ones you don't know anything about. Hazmat container labels that use the GHS system help employees who work with hazardous materials get the information they need when they need it. Let's review. OSHA integrated the globally harmonized system into its HAZCOM standard to help communicate important information about hazardous materials to the people who work with them. The GHS standardizes how materials are classified, how their hazards and safety precautions are described, and how this information is presented. GHS container labels use a combination of visual and text elements to make information about hazmats available quickly and easily. The main visual elements on a GHS container label are pictograms that illustrate the hazards associated with the material inside. The text elements on a GHS label provide information such as the material's name, its hazard class, safety precautions, and the name of the company that supplied it. Now that you understand how GHS container labels communicate important facts about hazardous materials and what GHS pictograms stand for, you have the ability to get the information you need to handle hazmat safely, easily, and quickly.